And now I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, protect them in your name that you have given me, so that they may be one as we are one. Last weekend, my husband Grant and I were in Houston, Texas, for the wedding of my sister Sandy. Some of you remember Sandy because she used to come to church here. It was a nice wedding. And we were there for a few days beforehand. And so as I usually do when I'm visiting the city where I used to live, we took a drive through my old neighborhood to look at the house that I lived in for 12 years. I'm not saying this to make you jealous, but in 1992 I bought this house for $69,000. And it had had only 2 prior owners. So although it was a great house, it needed a lot of updating. So I spent the better part of a year renovating it, doing a lot of the work myself with my father's help. It was super cute, 1922 bungalow with arched openings between the dining room and the living room and the kitchen. And I was careful to preserve as much of the detail as possible. All of which is to say that I knew the house very, very well. Anyway, as usual, I took a drive through the old neighborhood to my old house, and at first it looked just about the same. But I noticed a sign hanging on the house, and at first I thought it was a for sale sign, so I circled back around to have a look. And I noticed that the blinds were missing from the front windows so that I could see straight through the living room, through the arched opening to the dining room, through the arched opening to the kitchen, to the back of the house. There was nothing inside of it. And then I read what was printed on the sign. It said, "Cherry House Moving." Later that day at the pre-wedding dinner, my father reminded me, Cherry House Moving, they do demolition as well. So the next time I'm back in Houston and I decide to drive through the old neighborhood, there'll be one less thing to see. My house, my beautiful house where I spent so much time in renovation, where I brought members of my church and my friends and my boyfriends and my husband in 12 years of my life. My house was going away, either to be hauled off to another part of the city or to be torn down to make room for a big lot filler of a house. And I had that visceral feeling that came from recognizing presence and absence in the same moment. It had that strange emotional effect on me, which is hard to describe, sort of a combination of sadness and surprise and dislocation. When what had been one way suddenly goes another way, it's hard to know what to do. It was a similar experience wrapped in the crazy, convoluted language of John's Gospel. Jesus was with his disciples, but he knew that he was going away. He knew where he was going, but he had no idea what would become of his friends whom he would have to leave behind. And he's done for them what he could reasonably be expected to do. He's shown them the truth of God's unbounded love set loose in the world. The truth that will sustain his disciples in the face of a world of domination and violence. But the unknowability of the moment is overwhelming. And so he responds in one of the predictable ways that human beings do when we're faced with unknowability. He prays to God. Jesus' prayer in this 17th chapter of John's Gospel is one of the pinnacles of the Gospel. It brings everything that the writer has been trying to tell in a petition to God for the sake of the whole human race. Protect them. May they be one. May they have my joy made complete, and strangest of all, sanctify them. The provocative question that underlies Jesus' prayer seems to be this: did he get what he prayed for? And maybe the even more provocative answer to the question is this: are we living in response to his prayer? To go back to the image of my old house in Houston, what can we do to fill Jesus' absence with presence? Following the events that our tradition calls the resurrection and the ascension, we followers of Jesus have had to make a choice about how to live. Maybe it was easier for his first disciples. I mean, they could project all of their future hope on this strange man from Galilee face to face. Unlike those disciples, we who seek the way of Jesus cannot simply project all of our hope on him. Ever since Jesus went back to be with God, his followers have had to accept that what he left behind was as mysterious and as hard to pin down as can be. God's power is set loose in our lives. Ever since Jesus left his first followers kind of stupidly looking up into heaven, we've had to look into our own lives and our own experiences and our relationships to discover where it is that God is to be found and what in the world God is doing. And that's precisely where we are today. If we want to see the power of God, if we want to feel God's presence, then we'll have to live out the power of God that's in our lives. If we want to fulfill the promise of the gospel and do greater works than those done by Jesus, then we'll have to stand strongly in the Spirit. Because the truth is, Jesus has gotten out of the way. And the Spirit has gotten into us in a new way. I took the liberty of retranslating today's gospel reading in a couple of places. If you read the Bible, you might have noticed. And I did it in love and good faith, because the fact of the matter is, the English translation of the 17th chapter of John's Gospel doesn't make any sense. Because it uses a single word in several different places. It's the Greek word cosmos, which is translatable about 8 different ways. And in the English translation, it's just world, which ends up sounding like Jesus doesn't really give a damn about the world. But the nuances of the original indicate that in one place he's talking about planet Earth, and that's in the reading where it said world, and in another place he's referring to something else, what the great theologian Walter Wink calls the domination system. If you've ever gotten behind in your credit card payments, and you've had a creditor come to your house, then you know what the domination system is like. If you've ever noticed that young black men are more often victims of state-sanctioned murder than young white men, then you know what the domination system is like. If you've wondered why all of our culture's attempts at unbridled acquisition just lead to depression, then you know what the domination system is like. That is the world that Jesus refuses to have anything to do with. And that's the world that fills me with a sense of absence, a feeling of despair and grief. And as a participant in that system, it's what fills me with remorse and guilt, too. And it is that world in which it is all too easy for me to lose myself and forget the promise of the gospel, that God's reign of love, peace, and forgiveness is true reality. I cannot give into that despair. Not if I want to stand strongly in the power of the Spirit. This also means that I cannot afford to look away from the pain of the world, the lies of the domination system, the corruption and destruction of the children of God. We cannot do this if we have heard Jesus' prayer to God and put our trust in God's power to sanctify us, to make us be as God is. That is the presence that God gives to us. The presence that God gives to us to replace that sense of absence. Because Jesus never really prayed for us to be taken out of the world. He prayed that we would have the ability to transform the world. For here, in this world, is where our joy will be made full. I notice that people who want to claim holiness, sanctification by any other name, but who do not want to stay in the world have a problem with joy. At least that's my experience when I have sought holiness without living full time in the pain of the world. It's easy to isolate. It's easy to take a step back and pray another prayer over the suffering of others, there but for the grace of God go up. But that's not the grace of God that permits my isolation. It is my own fear and cowardice and my suppression of joy. What I need is not to be removed from the world, but to become more vulnerable to the world. What I need is not living out of a place of imagined scarcity and fear, but living in a place of compassion for myself and for all beings. I need courage, and I need wholeheartedness in my relationships. I need to find a way to love my enemies and pray for those who persecute me. Because all of that stuff is what fills the sense of absence with the knowledge of the presence of God's Spirit. Jesus prays for us these words: "As you have sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world." Which means we will lose what we thought made us secure in the domination system: our privilege, our wealth, our moral superiority. We will lose what we thought made us secure. And that absence is the place that joy can fill in. What I look forward to when I go back to see my old torn down house is something more profound, which is the assurance that the joy that I found there now is a part of my very being, woven in my life, that can never be taken away. And what we will find in the world is a location, a place, even a new home, where we can stand strongly in God's Spirit and fulfill the promise of the gospel to do even greater things than have been done before.